Greetings and welcome. My name is Michael Hauge, and over the next 90 minutes or so, I want to talk to you about how to add Hollywood magic to your stories. Now, I'm very excited about having made this new presentation because, as most of you probably know, for the last 3 decades or so, I have been working in Hollywood as a story and script consultant, working with screenwriters and novelists, with production companies and with studios, helping them maximize the commercial and emotional potential of their stories. But more recently, I have been branching out, and now I am working with other groups on their stories, those of you who aren't professional storytellers but are using stories within the context of other aspects of your career. So now, the slant or the focus of this, while it will be helpful to those of you who are novelists and screenwriters, is going to be in particular to those of you who are public speakers, corporate presenters, trainers, internet marketers, attorneys, writers, or simply any of you who are incorporating stories into your writing or your presentations in order to increase their emotional impact. So the first question we want to ask is, why story? Why do you want to add story to your presentations at all? What is it about stories that make them so powerful? Well, to understand the power of story, you need to understand the numerous things that you can accomplish when you are telling or writing a story. First of all, of course, you can entertain your audience or your reader. But also, with a good story, you will create an immediate emotional connection with your audience or your reader. You can use stories to educate or enlighten them. You can persuade them toward your point of view or to take a certain kind of action. You can instill belief with a story because as your audience and reader participate in the story and follow the hero of the story, it can actually change their beliefs. And it can do these things because stories actually give your readers or your audience the emotional experience of a situation or action. When we go to the movies, when we read stories, when we listen to speeches, a good story isn't something we just watch or listen to. It is an involving experience. We actually become the character in the story, and we are experiencing emotion through them. So it's as if we are on an emotional or subconscious level having that experience ourselves. So how do you do that? How do you harness the power of story and use it to move and involve your audience or your reader? Well, to do so, the first thing you must understand is you have one primary objective as a storyteller. This is true if you're a screenwriter or novelist, and it's also true if you're a corporate presenter, if you're an attorney talking to a judge or a jury. Whatever the context, your primary goal as a storyteller must be to elicit emotion in your audience and your reader. People do not go to the movies. People do not get involved in speeches or want to hear presentations just as observers. We want to feel something when we hear a good story. And the stronger the emotional response you can elicit in your audience or your reader, the better your story and the more effective your story will be. And if there is one entity that has mastered the ability to elicit emotional response in the mass audience, it's Hollywood. That's why this is called adding Hollywood magic to your story. Why Hollywood? Well, as an example, in the last year alone, Hollywood has generated $10 billion at the box office. That's $10 billion just in ticket sales in the US and Canada to people going to movies in a movie theater. That doesn't count the added billions made through video, through foreign sales, through television, through movies on airplanes. In other words, regardless of how you may feel about the artistic level, Hollywood has mastered the ability to touch a huge number of people worldwide and elicit emotion to the extent that billions of people are going to see movies or watch television every year. So if we can replicate the principles, the techniques, and the tricks that Hollywood uses to create that emotional connection, then our stories will be much better and much stronger as well. Now, what is it Hollywood knows that is so important for you to understand in creating your story? Well, the first thing is Hollywood understands that the foundation of all story consists of three elementary components. All stories consist of character, desire, and conflict. Take any opera, any movie, any TV episode, any novel, any play, any children's story, and they all consist of a character pursuing a desire and facing conflict. Take, for example, the familiar story of Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Red Riding Hood. She wanted to take a basket of goodies to her grandmother who lived in the woods. She didn't understand, though, that the big bad wolf was waiting to gobble her up. Character, Red Riding Hood. Desire, basket of goodies to grandma. Conflict, big bad wolf. Now in Hollywood, those three elements become a bit more specific. In Hollywood movies and TV shows, the character is in particular the hero of the story, the protagonist of the story, the main character that we are rooting for, whose desire is going to drive that story forward. And that desire is going to be visible. The goal that the hero wants to achieve is first and foremost something that we can envision, something that we will see on the screen in a movie. Something that when you hear what the goal is, you can immediately get a mental image of what achieving that goal would look like. And that image is going to be pretty much the same image that anyone else would envision when they hear what this visible goal is. And in Hollywood, the conflict is also visible. It is the series of seemingly insurmountable obstacles that the hero must face that we can see on the screen. And in your stories, if your desire is visible, the desire of your hero is visible, and if the conflict is insurmountable or seemingly insurmountable, that will strengthen the story. What your goal is in telling a story or in writing a story, if you're doing, say, a marketing campaign, is you want to create a movie in the mind of your audience and your reader. You want your audience to be projecting a movie inside their head as they hear or read the story you have created. But again, how do you do that? How are you able to create that movie in a vivid, emotionally involving way? Well, in my approach, there are basically 12 components of every great story. In working with thousands of writers and looking at thousands of movies over my career in Hollywood, I have zeroed in on 12 essential elements that any great story is going to contain. So if your story can include these 12 components, then it is going to match the emotional impact that you see in successful movies or successful novels or successful TV shows. The first of these 12 components is your story should have a hero. Now by hero, I specifically mean the main character of the story, the character who drives the action. It could be called the protagonist. I just chose to use the term hero. The hero is the vehicle through whom we experience the story. Remember I said that stories are participatory. A good story emotionally involves the audience, and we participate in the story because we become that hero. And so whatever happens to that hero is happening to us. The hero is the character we most identify with. It's the character we're rooting for. It's the man, woman, boy, girl, or android who we want to see succeed, or we hope will end up in a good place at the end of that story. In other words, we have a deep emotional investment in the hero of the story. We want them to win. We are emotionally connected to the outcome of their pursuit, and if they win, we feel like we win. Now, one thing I want to make clear when I talk about a hero is not someone who is heroic, at least not at the beginning of the story. It is much more likely an everyday person. But a hero is a character who has the potential to become heroic. And it is in the course of that story, in the arc of that character, that we hope they will fulfill that potential. Now, the next key component of every great story is what I call the setup. The setup is simply the before picture of the hero. You can think of a story as a before and after picture. We see where the hero was at the beginning, right before they take this emotional journey or this physical journey, and then we will see where they end up at the end of that journey. This is the before picture. This is a picture of the hero's everyday life, the life she is living before beginning the journey that she will take in the story. One way of thinking of this is, in the setup, you show your audience or your reader, this is who my hero was yesterday. This is who they have been for some time. And the way you create that setup is, first of all, to create a vivid setting, to paint a strong, vivid picture of the life the hero is living, in terms of where they are, in terms of what they're doing, what they look like, who in particular this character is. But in the setup, you also want to include some sense of longing on the part of the hero. Something they want or need, something that is missing from their life. Something they may say they want, but they haven't found the courage to go after it. Or something that they're unaware of or in denial about needing, but still we recognize is a missing piece in the character's soul, so to speak. In other words, in the setup, you want to convey in some way that your hero is stuck. They are in a state of inertia. They are sort of spinning their wheels, awaiting for something that is going to kick them into gear and move them towards the thing they really want or need. The third component of every great story is empathy. You must create empathy with your hero. Remember, I said that we experience the emotion of the story through the hero. The hero is our vehicle for experiencing the story you're telling, for participating in it. By empathy, I mean you're creating a psychological connection between your audience or reader and the hero of your story. In essence, on a psychological or subconscious level, you want your audience to become that hero, so that we're not just watching the character, we are that character. And to create that necessary empathy, there are a number of devices you can use, but there are three critical ones that you must employ in setting up your character and showing them in the setup of your story. The first of those devices for creating empathy is sympathy, because we identify, we empathize with people we feel sorry for. So if in the setup you show how your hero has been or is in some way the victim of some undeserved misfortune, then that will increase our empathy with that character. An example of this that I love in the movies is in the film Sleepless in Seattle, where the opening shot is of Tom Hanks standing next to his son at a graveyard in front of the casket or grave of his recently deceased wife. And the opening line of the movie is, "Mommy died." It is a powerful, powerful opening because immediately we feel sorry for this character who has lost his wife and now has the sole responsibility of this child who's standing next to him. The next way you can create empathy is to put your character in jeopardy. Now, certainly in big action movies, oftentimes we see the hero in some immediate jeopardy. Every James Bond movie starts that way. Every Indiana Jones movie started that way. But when you're telling stories, particularly in a speech or in a presentation in a corporate arena, or you're doing an ad campaign, most of the time you're telling stories about everyday people who wouldn't be in immediate life-threatening jeopardy. But they can still be in jeopardy because by jeopardy I mean the danger of loss of anything that is of vital importance to the character. So if in the setup of your story we realize or we're informed that your hero is worried about losing her job, that's danger because that's something of vital importance. If the hero is in danger of going broke, if the hero is worried about losing a relationship, if the hero is being forced to move and is in danger of losing all the people and things they're connected to, anything that threatens the hero with some kind of significant loss constitutes jeopardy. And it will create empathy because we empathize with people we worry about. And the third primary way of creating empathy is to make your hero likable. Because we empathize with people we care about. And the way to create a likable hero is in setting up that character at the beginning of the story. You show them as kind, generous, good-hearted, loving, giving, someone who's willing to give of themselves to others. Sometimes you show that a character is well liked by other characters at the beginning of the story because we are drawn to people who are well liked by others or who are popular. But it's all to convey that this is someone who we will care about. Now, you don't have to use all three of these devices for creating empathy, but you must use at least one of them, preferably two, and if possible, all three. And you want to establish this empathy immediately. We won't empathize with the hero because they become someone likable or sympathetic at the end of the story. We need to feel that way about them from the moment the story begins, because that's when you need to establish the emotional or psychological connection. So, in the setup, you have established who your hero is, shown that hero living her everyday life, shown how she is stuck in some way. You have created empathy with the character using the devices of sympathy, jeopardy, or likability. Now in your story, you must present your hero with some opportunity. Something has to shake or jar or move that hero out of that stuck place in the setup, out of the life they have been living, into some new situation. The opportunity, in other words, is going to be an event that has never happened to your hero before. It could be a good event, so to speak. It could be some reward, the fulfillment of some wish. It could be winning the lottery. It could be getting a new job. It could be finding true love. Or it could be a bad opportunity, so to speak, a curse or a crisis. Many times you'll see movies where, in fantasies in particular, a hero will actually make a wish. Bruce Almighty or Freaky Friday, or not the hero but another character makes a wish in Liar Liar, and they think that these wishes are going to lead to something good, but they actually end up to leading to something very difficult or bad. The wish turns into a curse. Now, you don't have to tell a story to be a fantasy, but let's say you began the story after establishing your hero in the setup. The opportunity is the hero loses her job, and now she has to find some new way to earn money. Or let's say the hero is transferred into a new position and now must deal with a very difficult boss. Or the hero has just had a breakup with the person they loved, or the hero has just been diagnosed with a particular disease or condition. Anything that has never happened to the hero before, that is now going to create in that hero a desire to move into some new situation, is an opportunity. And that brings us to the fifth component of every great story, and that is the new situation. Once your hero encounters or experiences the opportunity, it will move them into some new situation. Sometimes this new situation actually is another location. You'll see movies like The Firm or Thelma and Louise, which after the opportunity, the character actually goes somewhere else. And in your story, it could be that the hero of your story, has just been transferred to a whole new city and has to learn how to deal with that. But it doesn't have to be a physical change of situation. It just must be a new state of being that the hero is in as a result of experiencing the opportunity. In that new situation, your hero is going to be asking questions. This is the period where your hero needs to figure out what's going on, what has happened to me, and how am I going to deal with this? They're asking things like, what is this place? What is this new area I've entered? What does it mean that I've been diagnosed with this condition? What does it mean that I've had this accident, or that I have this new job, or that I have won or inherited this money, or whatever it might be? What are the rules of this new situation? How am I supposed to behave here? What am I supposed to be doing? What is expected of me in this situation? So whatever the opportunity is, it's going to force the hero to start confronting the new environment, the new situation they're in, and figure out what's going on, how are they going to react to that, and how are they going to respond. And the response is ultimately going to be that your hero defines a visible goal that they now want to pursue. So if in my example about someone getting a new job with a bad boss, now their goal becomes perhaps I'm going to figure out how to work with this person, or I'm going to figure out how to get this person fired, or I'm going to figure out how to get a new job, or I'm going to figure out how can I become self-employed so I don't have to work for any boss at all. But the goal again is stronger if it is a visible goal. If it is what I term an outer motivation. This is a term I use extensively when I'm working with screenwriters and novelists because it indicates a goal that when we hear what it is, we can envision it in our minds. It is the finish line that the hero is now going to want to cross as a result of what came out of the new situation that they were put in by the opportunity. And when you're telling a story, the more specific and visible the goal, the greater your reader or your audience's emotional investment will be. It is fine to say this is a story about somebody who wants to be a success, but it's impossible to envision that. That could mean anything, mean different things to each person who hears it. It doesn't allow us to picture what success is going to look like. But if you tell a story about someone who is desperate to raise $10,000 so that they can avoid foreclosure on their home, or so that they can pay the tuition that will enable their daughter to go to college, or so that they can take the vacation that they have always dreamed of and never actually had. Or if the goal is to get a specific promotion at work. In movies, it's very easy to see this. Most Hollywood movies are about either stopping some villain, some serial killer, something like that, something bad from happening, stopping aliens that have invaded or whatever, or it's about retrieving some kind of treasure or rescuing someone who's been kidnapped or is in danger, or escaping from some situation, or in winning either a competition or winning the love of another character. Those are easy to picture because, again, Hollywood has mastered the ability of getting the audience deeply involved, and Hollywood understands that the more specific the finish line, the more visible, the clearer it is exactly what the hero wants to achieve, the more involved their audience is going to be. And you want to apply that to your story. So rather than tell a story about someone who wants to be rich, tell a story about someone who wants to make a specific amount of money in a specific limited amount of time. Once the hero has established or defined this visible outer motivation, now they come to step 6 of the 12 components. They begin their pursuit. The story now is going to be about their effort to accomplish that goal, to cross that finish line, to achieve that outer motivation. Your hero is going to devise some plan. They're going to say, okay, I have to make this amount of money, or I have to stop this situation or condition that I find myself in. So they're going to have to figure out how are they going to do this. They devise a plan and then they begin going after the goal. Now, whatever this goal is and whatever the plan is that they define, the goal must be within your hero's power to achieve. You don't really want to tell a story about a hero who wants something and then has it handed to them at the end of the story, or a hero who is in a bad situation or in danger and then just gets rescued. You want to tell stories about heroes who define their own fate and who find the courage and the ability to accomplish their own goals and achieve their own success. And whatever this goal is, whatever this outer motivation that they are pursuing, it must carry us all the way to the end of the story. You don't want to tell a story where a hero has a goal and achieves it halfway through, and then you keep talking about other things that this hero does. You can, if you're giving a speech, let's say, you can give a series of separate stories, but each of them should be about a hero is pursuing a visible goal, and that goal will not be resolved until the climax of the story. It takes us all the way to the end of the story. So your hero is following the plan they've devised. They're going after this outer motivation. But the 7th component, and in some ways the most important, is your hero must encounter an immense amount of conflict. You want your hero to face seemingly insurmountable obstacles in pursuing or achieving the motivation they're trying to accomplish. And why is conflict so important? Because if your goal is to elicit emotion in your audience or in your reader, conflict is the primary source of emotion. Emotion does not grow out of desire. The desire, the outer motivation, the pursuit, those are there to move the story forward, to create a finish line that your hero is going to want to cross. But the emotional moments, the emotional elements of the story are almost entirely from the obstacles the hero has to overcome. If I said to you there was a movie playing, and you said, what's it about? And I said, it's about a guy who wants to give a speech. Well, if you're a public speaker, you might be interested in any situation where someone wants to give a speech, but mostly you wouldn't be that interested. The mass audience certainly wouldn't. But if I said, oh, and he has to give this speech in spite of the fact that he is saddled with an enormous speech impediment that grows out of the fact that he was abused as a child, and the speech he gives, he's going to have to give after he's handed the monarchy in England, a position he never wanted at all, and the speech has to lead his country into World War II. There is so much conflict in the king's speech that movie ended up making more than $100 million domestically. It won the Oscars. It was worldwide a great success. It was a wonderful movie. But the emotion grew out of all the obstacles that Bertie had to overcome in pursuing his simple goal of giving a speech without stuttering. The bigger the obstacles your hero must face, the more deeply we feel the emotion of the story. Now, there's another advantage to introducing conflict. If you are telling a story not as a professional storyteller, not as a novelist or a screenwriter, but instead this story is part of an overall speech, a part of an overall marketing campaign, part of a case that you're presenting to a courtroom, you want the obstacles that the hero faces to also address the objections, the problems, the setbacks that your audience anticipates will happen if they are in the situation if they take the action you want them to take. If you're trying to get someone to purchase a product or a process that you are marketing, they are going to immediately be thinking of all the reasons why they don't want to do it, the problems they think they will encounter if they choose to purchase this product. Problems about, am I not going to be smart enough to do it? Am I going to be spending too much money? Will it really do the things that I expect this program or this process or this product to do? Or if you're telling a speech where you want to move the audience to take action in their own lives, they're going to be coming up with all the reasons they can't. It's going to make it harder for you to persuade them to do it. But if your hero encounters those obstacles that they are already anticipating and is able to overcome those, then you have given your audience the emotional experience of actually solving the problems they anticipate they will have. And so not only does the conflict create more emotion, it creates a stronger belief in and justification for the thing you're trying to get them to purchase or to do. Now, conflict actually breaks down into two different forms in a story. First is the outer conflict. These are the visible obstacles that your hero must face. These are the obstacles that come from either other characters. It might be the villain in the story, the evil boss that your character has had to work for, or the opponent that they're up against, or the people they're competing with to get the promotion. Or it comes from forces of nature. Forces of nature might be, storms and earthquakes. It might be a disease or a condition that the character is faced with. If it's a story about someone who has a loved one who has Alzheimer's and they're struggling to find out how do I deal with this situation, the Alzheimer's is not a character, it's a force of nature. So these are the conflicts that are outwardly visible, the external conflicts. And you want these external conflicts to increase over the course of the story. You always want the obstacles to get bigger and bigger, and you want the obstacles to occur more frequently as the story progresses. Because as the obstacles your hero faces become faster and faster, it gives your story an accelerated pace. The next time you watch a movie, notice that in the first half of the movie there will be a few obstacles the hero faces, but there will be a lot more in the second half, far more than twice as many as there are in the first half, because good filmmakers know that an accelerated pace comes from a more frequent occurrence of major conflict for the hero. The other form conflict takes in a story is the inner conflict. This is invisible. This isn't like the outer motivation and outer conflict that we can see or envision in the movie inside our head. The inner conflict is invisible because it comes from within the character. And to understand how inner conflict works, you must understand certain internal or psychological components of the hero of your story. The first thing you want to define for yourself and within the story is your hero's wound. A wound is basically an unhealed source of pain. What I mean by wound is a situation or an event that occurred to your hero in the past, before this story began. Oftentimes it's something that occurred in adolescence, although it doesn't have to be. But it's some painful or traumatic experience, something painful that occurred in the past that now your hero believes they have dealt with. They believe it was just in the past, but is actually still affecting or defining how they behave. A great example of a wound is in the movie Good Will Hunting, because what we come to learn through the course of the story is that the Matt Damon character, Will Hunting, was beaten on a regular basis by his father when he was a child and an adolescent. And even though he regards it as something in the past, it is clearly still affecting how he behaves in the movie. The next thing you want to identify for your hero is the hero's belief that grew out of that wound. When we are wounded, when we have a deeply traumatic or painful experience, we will formulate a belief about what caused it or about what might cause it to happen again. It is a belief about how the world works or how other people behave in a certain situation. In the example of Good Will Hunting, his belief is, if my father beat me regularly when I was a kid, I must have deserved it. Now, this is not an intellectual belief so much. He would probably deny that if you ask him directly. This is a belief that's more buried within the subconscious of the character. It's within the cells of their body because of the physical traumatic experience he had. That is, by the way, a very typical belief that a child will adopt if they are abused, because they have to believe their parents know best, or else they don't feel safe, they don't feel protected by their parents. So if their parents do something that is abusive, they conclude they must have deserved it. Now, sometimes a trauma can create a belief about the fact that that will always happen. Someone who is traumatized and experiences the physical trauma of, say, being in a car crash, a horrific accident, and surviving, might have taken on the subconscious belief that if I drive again, if I ride in a car again, then that's going to happen again. The thing about beliefs is, especially in the context of telling the story, the beliefs that grow out of wounds are almost always incorrect. They're almost always untrue, but they are always logical. It makes perfect sense that someone who's experienced a wound in the past would acquire the belief they had. And that belief is going to lead to a fear that your hero is carrying around. It will be a fear of ever experiencing the pain of that wound again. In Good Will Hunting, his fear is that anyone will ever see who he truly is, of letting anybody get close to him, because if they do, they will discover that he is worthless or horrible, because that's his belief as a result of being abused. And then you want to establish or identify with your hero that hero's identity. This is simply my term for the false self that the character creates to protect themselves from this fear, to protect themselves from whatever fear grew out of the wound that they suffered in the past. An identity is the character's persona, as Carl Jung would have said. It is the emotional armor that we all wear that hides the truth of who we are, but is our emotional protection as we go out into the world. So who we present to the world is not the truth of who we are, it's who we feel we have to be in order to feel safe. And the last thing you want to identify to understand the inner conflict of your hero is that character's essence. By essence, I simply mean your hero's truth. Who is this character really? Who do they have the potential to become if they could find the courage to let go of their identity, to take off this emotional armor that they're hiding behind or that is keeping them safe but unfulfilled? Because what inner conflict actually means is it refers to the tug of war within your hero between that character's identity and that character's essence. When we are within our identity, when we are living this false self inside that emotional armor, we are safe emotionally, but we are unfulfilled because you can never be fully realized as a human being, fully individuated, fully actualized, if you're not true to who you are. But the other end of the tug of war is the character's essence. Because if you're living in your essence, then you have the ability to feel fulfilled, to live a full life. But it is terrifying because our essence makes us very vulnerable because we've stripped away that emotional armor. So the tug of war is simply the tug of war between feeling safe and unfulfilled and feeling fulfilled but scared to death. And that vacillation between those two states of being, between the identity and the essence, that's what is meant by inner conflict. And it is actually going to take the entire movie or the entire story you're telling for your hero to overcome that inner conflict. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But back to the 12 components. In addition to pursuing the outer motivation and facing the obstacles, both the external obstacles and the inner conflict that your hero must face, the 8th key element of any great story is going to be the supporting characters, what I call the primary characters of the story other than the hero. Because it will be through other characters that your hero is able to achieve the outer motivation, or the hero is going to be facing bigger obstacles to achieving the outer motivation. And it's also through the other characters that your hero will be able to complete their arc, to make that journey from identity to essence. The first of these supporting characters is what I call the reflection. This is the character that's most aligned with your hero in telling your story. This is the character who is there to help the hero achieve the outer motivation. They can help them define the plan they have. They can actually physically help them face and overcome those external obstacles. But this is also the character who is going to help the hero overcome their inner conflict. So the reflection character could be a mentor. It could be the teacher or the coach or the boss or just the wise person that helped the hero at a certain time and instilled in them the wisdom they needed, the belief in themselves they needed, that gave them the tools they needed to accomplish the goal and find their courage. It might be someone from the past. It might be a parent or a grade school teacher. It's anyone that is in the story that's going to help the hero in their pursuit of the goal. This is a very valuable character to know, particularly if you're telling a story about yourself. If you're giving a speech and telling about something that happened to you, about how you achieved some goal, if you're ever concerned about self-aggrandizing, about boosting yourself by saying, wasn't I great to accomplish this goal, you mitigate that by giving the credit to the person who helped you along the way. It might be someone you never even knew. It might be a famous person. It might be a person from centuries before, millennia before, who had the words of wisdom or did something that inspired you, that helped you along your path and helped you ultimately achieve the goal you have. But characters who are aligned with your hero, at least one that serves as the reflection, can be a very powerful device in getting your hero to the climax of the story. The next category of primary character is the nemesis. This is the character who's in opposition to the hero. Now, every story doesn't have a nemesis necessarily. If it's a story about facing forces of nature, it might simply be that the hero of your story, perhaps with the help of the reflection character, is able to face those, and there's no person standing in their way. But in many stories, there is the opponent. There is the villain, so to speak. There is the character who is in opposition to the hero, whose own goal is to stop the hero from achieving her goal. And if you're creating a character like that, the thing you want to remember is the nemesis must always begin the story far more powerful than the hero. You'll see this again and again in Hollywood examples or in literature. At the beginning of the story, when a nemesis, a villain, is introduced, they are always greatly powerful. Sometimes they're evil masterminds who want to take over the world, or alien forces, or an alien that's leading the villains from outer space in taking over the world. Doesn't have to be that great, but a good example would be the character of Apollo Creed in Rocky. Rocky's this palooka from the slums of Philadelphia. Apollo Creed is the heavyweight champion of the world. A movie with Apollo Creed as the hero wouldn't be very involving, because the obstacle of a heavyweight champion overcoming a palooka who hasn't had much experience and isn't a very good fighter, there's no conflict to that. So when you create the nemesis, always make them more powerful than the hero is, because that's going to increase the conflict and the emotion and make it more difficult for your hero to achieve her goal. The third category of primary character is what I call the romance character. This is the character who is the object of the hero's desire. This is the love interest. This is the character who the hero wants to win the love of, or at least get into bed with by the end of the story. Now, certainly, if you are a romance novelist, the primary outer motivation your hero must have is to win the love of the romance character. That's the visible goal that your hero is pursuing through the course of the novel. Or if you're a screenwriter writing a love story, the same thing. It's the primary objective the hero is going to be pursuing. They may simultaneously pursue some other objective, and that's usually the case, particularly in a romantic comedy film or in many other love stories. But let's say you're a speaker, or let's say you're an internet marketer. This could come into play if your speech is about the wonderful wisdom or support you got from the woman you fell in love with, and the way you won that person's love forced you to become a better person. Or if you're a marketer selling a product that is going to help someone find love, help someone pick up women, help someone get dates, anything where the goal is going to be to win the love or connect with another person romantically, this is a character you need in your story. Now, in your story, you could have one, two, or all three of these characters. You don't have to absolutely have any, although in the context of speeches, marketing campaigns, and presentations you might be making to a staff or employees or in a business arena, it is hard to imagine a really effective story not having some kind of reflection character. It's not an absolute, but I would think about that very strongly. The nemesis and the romance in those contexts are probably going to occur less often. If you're writing fiction, movies or TV or literature, then you want to try and make use of all of these characters if you can. Okay, now to number 9. The 9th key component of a great story is something I've been alluding to, and that is the hero's transformation. It is the arc for the hero of the story. We're talking about how the hero must change in order to accomplish the goal. And that transformation that the hero will go through, that inner journey, so to speak, is going to be a journey from living in fear to living courageously. The transformation is going to be a transformation from living fully in one's identity to living fully in one's essence. It is what's known as the hero's arc. And it's called an arc because it must take almost the entire story for the hero to make that transformation. In movie terms, it will be from the moment at the beginning of Act 2 that the hero begins the pursuit until the climax when the hero finally either achieves the goal or fails once and for all. But in other words, in those kinds of stories, it's not a single aha moment. If you had a movie where someone was fully in their identity and then somewhere in the middle they said, oh no, I shouldn't be living that way, and they move completely into their essence, that's weak storytelling. Now, for some of you listening to this presentation, you will take exception to this idea because sometimes you're telling a very brief story within the context of a bigger presentation or speech or marketing campaign. And there you might have a hero pursuing a goal, and then they have one particular pearl of wisdom, one particular lesson, one particular moment that is going to enlighten them about the way that they have been living in fear, that they have been protecting themselves and living in an identity that they need to shed. And so they are pursuing the goal, they aren't achieving it because it's too scary. Then a reflection character gives them some piece of advice or wisdom, or they hear the voice of the wise grandfather that told them how they should live their lives, or they remember something in the past, or they remember something that some great person once said or did, and that moment shifts them into their essence so they can then achieve the goal. So, in other words, if your story is quite brief, it might not be a full arc. It might just be that moment of wisdom that moves your hero from identity to essence, from fear to courage. But in longer stories, you want that to be a full arc that's going to take through the course of the story to accomplish, so that as your hero faces the visible obstacles, the outer conflict, they also must find the courage to change within. Usually the arc for a character in these longer form stories, certainly in a movie or a novel, will include some final retreat into the character's identity. The character will be becoming more and more and more courageous. Their hero will be moving steadily into her essence. And then the obstacles get so great and the fear becomes so great that they suffer some major setback. And then they give up and they try and go back to living fully in the identity that they were living at the beginning of the story. But when they try and do that, they will realize this isn't going to work anymore. It isn't fulfilling enough. It isn't satisfying, because now that I've come so close to the goal that I've been going for, now that I so desperately want it, now that I have found greater courage and I have experienced what living in my essence is, I've got to put everything on the line and go after it. And that's when they will experience the transformative moment that I was talking about. Oftentimes it's a reflection coming to the hero who is living back in his identity, saying, "What the hell are you doing? This is not you. You need to go after the woman you love. You need to go after the goal. You've got to put everything on the line and do this." And so they will then transform one last time into their essence and finish the job, make the final push to achieve their goal. Another way to think of it is the transformation, that transformational moment or transformative moment, is when your hero stops asking herself, "How can I not be afraid?" and instead declares, "I'm willing to be afraid." Because heroes who ultimately transform don't stop being afraid. It's that they're willing to go forward even though they are terrified of exposing themselves and being so vulnerable. But the stakes are that high because they so want to be fulfilled, they so want to achieve the goal, that they are willing to be afraid. And so when your hero makes that final push, makes those final steps toward achieving the goal, it means that your hero is allowing themselves to be vulnerable and are willing to put everything on the line. In a well-told story, everything is at stake for the hero. They risk everything to ultimately achieve the outer motivation and to ultimately be fully in their essence. And then we reach that moment of truth where they either succeed or fail at achieving that goal, and that is the climax of the story. So the 10th key component is the climax. The climax is that scene, that moment that your audience has been waiting to see and rooting for through the entire story. Ever since in the new situation, the hero declared, "This is what I want." Now your audience is waiting to see, are they going to get it? Are they going to get that $10,000? Are they going to get that new job? Are they going to make the amount of money they want to make in their first year as an internet marketer? Are they going to be able to accomplish the goal that I have been emotionally invested in this entire story? And the climax of your story must be clear and definitive with no ambiguity. You would never want to tell a story, and this includes especially those of you who are screenwriters or novelists or television writers, you never want to leave the climax of your story ambiguous. There could be some ambiguous elements, but we must know whether the hero succeeds or fails at achieving that outer motivation. Either they win or they lose, but they're never going to be satisfied with a story that leaves that up in the air. And when the hero reaches the climax, you want to describe that moment of victory or defeat in vivid detail. We don't just want to hear about it, we want to see it in our mind's eye, see it in that movie we're projecting inside our head. We want to be able to fully picture that glorious moment when the hero finally wins. And the rule is, in order to achieve that outer motivation, your hero must transform. If you're going to create an arc for your hero, then if they complete that arc and move into their essence and find that courage, then they must win. They can't then lose. That's the reward for having found that courage. But if they fail to complete the arc, if they retreat into their identity, if they don't find the courage to change the way they need to, then they can't win. Then they have to fail at achieving the outer motivation. Now, the movie is not over just because you've shown or described in vivid detail the climax. The movie doesn't end when the hero crosses the finish line. because there's one last stage of the story you must reveal, and that is the aftermath. Remember I said at the beginning when I was talking about the setup is the before picture of the hero. The aftermath is the after picture. This is the picture of the new life that your hero is now living, or was now able to live, because she found the courage and because she found the strength and the power to overcome both the external and internal obstacles and achieve the outer motivation. We don't just want to know that your hero won the love of the person who was her destiny. We don't just want to know that the hero made the money they dreamed of. We don't just want to know that the hero was able to overcome the condition or the disease that they were battling, or whatever your story's about. We now want to know, okay, so what was their life afterwards? Now that they had found that courage, now that they had found the courage and made the money they needed to in internet marketing, what is the life they're now able to live? Are they able to spend more time with their family? Do they have more money to do the things they always dreamed of? Do they have the joy of being self-employed and not having to answer to bosses and corporations or whatever? Or are they happier in the new job that they were able to get as a result of overcoming whatever business obstacles they faced? Or if it's about an athlete, what did it mean that they were able to win this competition or win this race? Or whatever it might be, you want to paint a picture of the new life the hero is living. In other words, this after picture is going to show the hero's reward for completing the journey. If the hero fails, which will not happen often, you don't want to tell many stories where the hero fails, but occasionally you might want a cautionary tale, or you might be contrasting someone who succeeded versus someone who failed and what the successful person did that the other one didn't. In a story about someone who doesn't find the courage and doesn't achieve that goal, now we want to see the life they are living. It's what is their punishment, so to speak, or what is the less than fulfilled life they're living because they couldn't complete their arc and because they weren't able to achieve the outer motivation. And when you're using story in the context of a speech or a presentation or a marketing campaign, something where you are trying to move your audience with the overall speech or presentation to do something different, or to try something new, or to purchase a product or a process, then you want that aftermath to be a vivid picture, not just of the life of your hero, but of the life your audience dreams of. You're saying to the audience, if you do this thing that I recommend you do, if you do what the hero did that I am recommending to you, then your life can look like the life that that hero was able to live after they completed the same journey. And that brings us to the final key component of any great story, and that is the theme of the story. Now, theme has a variety of definitions. Mine is not the same as you'd hear in lit class in college or something like that. What I mean by theme is simply a universal prescription for how we should all live our lives. A theme is not a political or a situational statement. You could tell a story about sexism in the workplace, and it might be making a political statement about sexism in the workplace. You might be espousing a certain attitude, a certain stance, a certain belief, a certain set of behaviors that would support that political or situational point of view. But a theme is deeper. The theme applies to everyone, not just to people who are in a workplace where there's sexism, not just to people who are in a workplace, but it's to all of us. The themes in Hollywood movies are almost always about one of three things. Hollywood movies generally convey the idea that either we must live a moral life It's about heroes who find that doing the right thing is the path to fulfillment. It's about standing up for who we are, about defining ourselves, in other words, rather than being defined by society or parents or our jobs or whatever it might be. Or they're about connecting with others. It's a universal statement that to be fulfilled, you must connect with and give yourself to other people, that you can't live an island existence. And this is important regardless of the kind of story you're telling, because if it's in the context of a speech or a marketing campaign or whatever, you want the theme of your story to match the theme of your speech. However it is you want your audience to change, that is how your hero must change. So for speakers, you match the theme of your speech to the theme of the story that you're telling within that speech. And if you're a marketer, this is how your product is going to change your buyer. Your product or your process, your coaching, whatever it is you're marketing or selling, is going to enable your buyer to adapt that overall theme, to experience that overall change, and to live their lives in that bigger, more fulfilled way. So those are the 12 key elements. Those are the 12 elements that form the foundation of almost all successful Hollywood movies. They form the foundation of almost all successful novels, and they will also form the foundation of whatever story you're telling in the context of some other desire. The speech, the legal presentation, the corporate presentation, the marketing campaign, whatever. So you want those 12 elements within your story. But then the question becomes, creating the story itself. How do you use all those? How do you build a story that is going to incorporate those elements? Well, to build your story, you need to ask a series of questions. The first of these questions are what I call the key story questions. These are overall questions about the story, not about particular elements of it. The 4 preliminary questions are, number 1, how do I want to change the life of my reader or my audience? What is the purpose of this speech you're giving? What is the purpose? What is it you want to give to your customer, to your audience, to your reader, to your employee, to your associate that you are presenting this story to? How do you want their life to change? What problem, this is the second of these 4 preliminary questions, what problem does your theme or your product or your process solve? What problem is being confronted by the people you're selling to or speaking to that your approach, that your message is going to solve? What need or desire will this product or process or theme fulfill? What is it that your audience or your reader want that you are going to enable them to achieve? And finally, what action do you want your reader or audience to take? Do you want them to go back to work and use a new technique? Do you want them to buy a product you're selling? Do you want them to, if you're a public speaker, do you want them to buy a product you're offering in the back of the room? Do you want them to deliver a not guilty verdict for your client? Or do you want a judge to give a reduced sentence to your client? Whatever the context, you want to think about, well, okay, so after I tell this story and after I make this overall presentation, what is it I really hope that the person on the other end of this story is going to do? And once you've answered those questions, Now you go through the 15 plot questions. This is where you build the story element by element, pretty much in the order I'm giving you. This is where you are actually structuring out your story. Structure meaning the sequence of events in your story. So the first question to ask is, who is your hero? Who's the character we're going to root for in this story? That defines your hero. Because all of these questions are going to relate to those 12 key components. Next question. Where is your hero just before beginning the journey that I'm revealing in this story? When you define that, you have the setup of your story. This is the everyday life your hero is living. Third question. Why will my readers or my audience care about my hero? Why do we want to root for this person? Why do we care what happens to them? The answer to that will be the method you're using to create empathy for the character. Question 4. What crisis or what wish started your hero on this journey? What happened to my hero within the setup or at the end of the setup that started that character moving forward, that threw that character into some new situation? That event is your opportunity. And question 5, what was your hero's reaction to that event? Once it happened, what did that hero do? What did they now want? What did they have to learn or find out or discover or investigate or figure out? That's the new situation. Next question. What visible goal is my hero desperate to achieve? Remember, you don't just want to tell a story describing a situation a person is in. You want to tell a story about a character who wants something, and the story is about how they went about trying to get it. So, when you know what the visible goal is, now you've defined the pursuit, the outer motivation. Question 7, how does your hero plan to achieve that goal? This will define the plan the hero is going to use. They're going to do this by doing X, Y, and Z. Question 8, who is your hero's greatest ally? Is it a loving spouse? Is it a mentor? Is it a character from the past, the distant past in real life that was an inspiration? A parent that imparted wisdom when your hero was a child? A boss who is helping guide your hero? Whoever it is, your hero's ally is going to define the reflection for your story. Question 9, what external obstacles does my hero face in this story, and how does he or she overcome them? In other words, what is the outer conflict that your hero must face? And, next question, what character most stands in my hero's way? That's the nemesis. Is there a person who is the primary obstacle that your hero must overcome? Is there an opponent? Is there a boss? Is there a competitor? Is there a villain? Who, if anyone, most stands in the hero's way, in my hero's way, in their attempt to achieve their goal? Next question. How was my hero hurt in the past? What was the event or ongoing situation that caused my hero such great pain in the past that that pain is still affecting how they believe in the present? In other words, you're asking, what is the wound for your hero? And question 12, what fears must my hero now overcome? You're saying, based on the wound and the belief that grew out of it and the fear that grew out of that, what now terrifies my hero emotionally that they are going to have to overcome in order to achieve the outer motivation? In other words, what's the inner conflict? What is the character's identity versus essence tug of war? How are they protecting themselves versus how are they living a fulfilled life? And as they go through that struggle, what is the moment of greatest courage? That will be the transformation. That'll be that moment that comes at the end of their arc, or right when they finally move fully into their essence, or if it's a shorter story, that moment of hearing the pearl of wisdom or the piece of advice, or remembering the mother's voice and being reminded of what she said about how my hero should live her life. That's the moment of transformation. Question 14, what is the exact moment my hero achieves the visible goal? In other words, what's the climax? How are you going to convey that moment that the hero achieves the goal that your audience has been rooting for the entire story? If they were after a certain amount of money, is it seeing that balance in a bank account? Is it holding the cash? Is it the moment when they're able to write the check so that their child can go to the college of their dreams? How are you going to portray through action in a visible way that the hero has achieved that outer motivation, that visible goal? And last question, number 15, how does my hero's life change by completing this journey? In other words, what is the aftermath of the story? What is the aftermath for your hero? What is the new life that your hero is able to live because she found the courage to complete the journey, found the courage to transform and obtain and achieve the outer motivation? Or what's the new life that she lives because she failed to find that courage and is now living an unfulfilled existence, or is now back where she was at the beginning because she wasn't able to achieve what she wanted? Now, if you ask those 15 questions and lay out the answers in that order, then you are going to pretty much have an outline or the overall spine of the structure of your story. In other words, in building your story, the first thing you want to do is tell your story in the order of those questions, starting with the hero in the setup and creating empathy, and then the opportunity, the new situation, and the goal, and then the plan and the pursuit and the obstacles, and finally throughout, not just finally, but throughout the arc for the character as they transform from identity to essence. So you've got the story laid out, the structure of the story, the spine of the story. Now what you want to do is, using specific, vivid detail for settings, characters, and action, you want to create this movie in the mind of your audience or your reader. You want to take those elements and now describe them or tell them in such a way that becomes vivid. And then when you figured out the settings and the characters and the action and been able to describe them, now you want to incorporate dialogue in order to bring your characters to life. Don't just tell us what a character is advising or thinking or feeling, but let's hear them in their own words express how they're feeling, or avoid expressing the fear they feel, but revealing it in dialogue through subtext and through avoiding subjects and so on. But it is much more involving and much more vivid when we're not just watching in our mind's eye, but hearing in the characters' own voices what it is they're saying to each other. And the last element of building your story is simply to trust your story. Often when I work with public speakers or those who aren't professional storytellers, they feel reluctant to tell stories, especially stories about themselves. They feel like no one wants to hear about them because they're not important, or they feel like they'll be bragging or something like that. Or sometimes I coach people who will tell stories, and then they feel that the story hasn't done its job, so now they need to keep pounding home the point the story already made. And you don't need to do those things. You need to trust the power of your story. You need to trust that involving the audience emotionally in this way is going to help them forget where they are, because they're occupying the world that you've created in your story. This is the best way to convey things that have happened to you or things you've done, because you're taking your audience along on the same journey that you went, and they've become you as the hero of your story, or they become the person that you've created as the hero of your story. And they will absorb and experience the message that you have by experiencing the story emotionally. In other words, if you use these principles and techniques that I've just outlined, you will be able to connect with your readers or audience. You'll entertain them. You will create identification with your hero. You will make your audience or your reader a participant in your story, not just an observer or a listener. You will give your audience the emotional experience of using the process or the product or the message that you are conveying, and you'll be giving them the experience of achieving the same outstanding results that your hero has achieved. Not literally, but emotionally. So that instills in them the desire to leave and do the same thing. In other words, using these devices, you'll be able to transform your audience's beliefs. Their belief in you, their belief in your principles, their belief in your product or your process, and perhaps most of all, their belief in themselves. You will actually be helping your audience overcome their fears. You will be helping your readers face and overcome the fears they feel, because in finding by identification the courage they need as the hero of the story you've told, they have a little more courage to step out into the real world and exhibit that courage on their own. You've given them an additional tool for facing and overcoming whatever fears they have. By using these techniques, you will be able to persuade your audience and your readers to take action. Because again, you've given them the emotional experience of taking that same action through your hero. And most important, perhaps, the story you tell using these principles will empower your audience and your readers to change their lives. That is why I think adding Hollywood magic to your story is so valuable. Not just to make it a crackerjack story, but because incorporating these elements into your story is actually going to empower the people you touch with that story. So the final thing is, whatever questions you might have about everything you've just heard or seen if you're watching the PowerPoint presentation of this lecture. If you have questions about this, I encourage you to contact me and let me know. I will try my best to answer any questions that come, either individually or through my website and my newsletter and so on. The way to contact me is to go to my website, storymastery.com. You can ask your questions through that site. You can also place comments of your own about the process on the site. But also you will see an abundance of other articles, some involving movie clips. You will see questions and answers I've asked that other people have submitted. You will see my schedule for speaking and the presentations I'm going to be giving live around the world. And if I'm coming to someplace near you, you can come see me in person. And you can find out the details of my coaching process. Because At some point, what I would love to do is work with you one-on-one and actually help you mold your story into one that maximizes its emotional potential and touches your audience and your reader as deeply as possible. And otherwise, I would just like to say thank you so much for listening or watching to this. Good luck with your storytelling, and please stay in touch and let me know how this works. I will look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thanks again.